Alright, hello everyone. Here we're back for a Golf Clash tutorial, City Park, hole number 8 here. So what we're going to be looking at here is pretty much the way to go about doing this one. This is one of the most messed up holes by users in the whole game, especially in Tour 11. It's even worse, it's magnified. So the way that I tend to play this is, pretty, varying depending on the wind. There's certain spots where, you go below the hill and it's going to be kind of down here. Is going to be kind of a key spot. So if I was to back up adjusting this way, is going to be kind of a key spot. Same with going over this way, for example, kind of straight over. Similarly, pulling down this way is also going to, kind of be very similar with what you need to do. Let's take a look at, and then when you need to go over, say this way, it's a very different adjustment than kind of these three cases, because these are kind of at lower trajectories and these kind of stay on plane. This one kind of stays on plane with this hill. And similarly, pulling down this way kind of does the same thing. So these two situations kind of stay high up on the hill and these kind of go lower down on the hill. But what I'll typically try to do, ball guide wise, is I'll try to land right about here, a little bit more towards the angled proportion. And I'll try to get this second bounce about here, third bounce, and I'll just try to wrap it down towards the hole like this, off the side hill, instead of trying to get it behind the hole. So the biggest mistakes that I'll see guys try to do, and a lot of times it's the difference between a ring as well. So a great ball can kind of completely change the outcome of your shot. But ideally, this is the way that I'm going to do it, is kind of like a wrap around this side hill. So I'll try to play, and typically the person that wins this one, well, actually there's kind of two ways that the person usually wins this one. One, they'll either, have to go first and they'll miss this spot. And then the person that does that pretty much loses every time. Alternatively, if, both guys, for whatever reason, it's an easy wind and we can hit this spot on the fairway, the person that's going to win is pretty much the guy that plays the wind effect the best. Because when you kind of go in towards the hole, it's very hard to stop it. So you'll usually kind of wrap behind the hole and then it'll swing down towards the left and you might end up 3 or 4 yards. However, if you get it to the side of the hole, it'll just feed in towards the hole. So that's the reason that I'll usually use the side approach. And what I'll usually use with my spin for a normal-ish side spin would be, just go ahead with, let's go back to the orange. So I'll usually use about 4, more or less, maybe 4.5. So let's do 4.5 here. And then for the tailwind case is more or less kind of the only time that I'll even do this shot. So let's take a look at the tailwind case, and we'll start to crank this up a little bit, maybe towards 5. And depending on how large that, so let's even go maybe 5 1/4 here. It's really going to be dependent upon how large the wind gets, because there's times that I use even max backspin instead of 6. So there's some times that I'll use 6.5 here. But let's just, for simplicity, keep it at about a 6 here. For more of an average case. But if the wind gets up a little bit higher, you'll need to kind of tweak these values a little bit higher as well. And what I'll usually do is play my wind effect. You can see with what I'm doing with my ball guide. So I'll try to hit the shot that's going to make this happen. So you'll usually need some kind of curl. And of course, you know, we're talking about this third deck in this tour here. And, you know, the way that I'll usually, you know, I'm going to have to do some kind of curl to kind of offset wind effect or something. And same with my side spin. I'll need to tweak that side spin dependent upon the wind angle. So if I can, you know, max and use no curl, that's what I'm going to try to do. If I can just kind of max out my spin, and, you know, what I'll usually try to do, you know, if this is the shot, let me just give you an example wind, for example, here. So let's just say, you know, the wind's coming at this direction. I'm not going to leave my ball guide like this. I'm going to go beyond this as much as I can. So, you know, if this is what I want the shot to do, I'm going to kind of do something like this with the ball guide and make it look crazy. Because I know that when the wind pushes it, after this lands, it's going to affect this ball guide and actually straighten it out. I might still need to, in addition to even offsetting my ball guide like this, put some kind of curl in. It just depends on how large the wind gets. So I might need to use a combination of both of these to make this orange line happen. And that's one of the hardest concepts in the game. And it's really something that only you can learn. There's, you know, I can talk about it until, you know, I'm blue in the face and just tell you guys that you need to do this, but you really need to take it upon yourself to master this. So you need to screw it up on that enough times until you start to realize I need to do more next time. You know, it wasn't my landing zone. It was my representation of, you know, how much wind effect there was in that situation. So that's more or less what I tried to do. And let me talk about this adjustment a little bit, because if the wind, you know, let's say, you know, we're going to start to talk about all these cases here. So in this case, there's really no trajectory. What I'll do is I'll just kind of aim towards the front of this face a little bit and just go straight over for a side wind. So let's say my wind was this wind. So I'd just come over and aim straight, and I wouldn't do anything different. Similarly with this gray spot. The only thing I might do is, you know, I might cheat a little bit towards the top half of the fairway. So you can see I'm kind of pointing towards this top half. And if the wind was this vector right here, I would only straight come over and play kind of towards the front half of this fairway a little bit. And in those cases, one's a tailwind, one's a side wind. So in these two cases here that I just mentioned, all I'm going to do is basically max, pretty much spot up max. So my tailwind case here was max. My side wind case here was also max. And that's all I'll need to do for that adjustment. It'll be super easy. What happens is you'll get into these other kind of weird winds. So here's another side wind. Here's the other side wind to where it needs to start going over this way. Now, when I lower this target to a lower elevation, I need to offset and bring this X up. So the amount that I'll need to offset this is 3 or 4 rings. It's going to be substantial. So if I don't move this, after I move this down this hill for this wind over here, let's say it's this wind right here. So this is what, you know, represents the purple mark. Let me just do that this way. Here's the gray. So in this purple situation, You know, I need to, after I move my rings down the hill, I need to pull up 3 or 4, even for a side wind. So that's the important concept to realize, and you know why most people, that any guy who doesn't do that offset, they're going to land either in this bunker or in this rough 100% of the time. So you'll have to do that, and again, I'll just pretty much for the most part use my max adjustment in this situation as well. It's very, very close. Maybe just slightly below max. So maybe max minus 10. Just depends on how. So between max to max minus 10, just depending on how large it gets. The larger it gets, kind of the farther you fall down that hill, kind of lowering your trajectory. And let's take a look at this yellow, because this is going to be another tailwind case. And it's kind of going to be kind of the same thing applies here. So after you make this adjustment down the hill, you're going to need to offset and pull back up, you know, 3 or 4 rings on your sniper. And that's another thing, you know, you need to really have a sniper 8 here. So let's talk sniper 8. Additionally, you know, Guardian 2 minimum. Hammerhead 6 at least. Cat, probably 6 as well. You really need to have that high backspin capability of 6 bars when you get to this hole. So let's continue to look at this. As I mentioned, after you make this adjustment down the hill, that's this case right now. That's this case right here. So after you make that adjustment down that hill there, you're going to need to still pull up towards the front. And let's take a look at this one. This is kind of one of the more complicated ones because it's a headwind. And there's a good possibility that you can't get this X up after you make this adjustment down towards this wind. In this case, in this headwind case right here, that's this case. There's a good chance that you might not be able to get to this. So you might have to do it with overpower. So you'll try to need to visualize, you know, at least 5 rings into power, for example. So if you were going to try to do this here, you know, with this overpower shot, with this black case, it's a little bit tougher. You're going to need to kind of back off the spin, maybe 4. You'll have to play, you know, a very good chance that you'll have to do an overpower shot. And for this one case, this black case here, you're probably looking at, you know, max plus 30% or so. Very, very significant wind increase that you're going to need to do in this case. So you'll just play in terms of this many rings, you know, plus some percentage. And then afterwards, you know, you'll need to increase and say, oh, I need to go, you know, an extra 5 rings beyond that. So wherever your max club line is, you know, you probably need to extend it into power to get this to hit that fairway. It's going to be very, very challenging to pull off this last shot. Alternatively, let's talk about headwind. So what I'd really like to have for this hole, for this is Thor 6 or 7. It's really going to be my only option. And if I land right on this green, right towards this front here, with the right amount of headwind, I can get this to stay on the green and trickle down. Alternatively, after my opponent messes up, I'll just do this shot anyway. I don't even care if it goes in the back sand. It really doesn't matter. It's going to be an easy win. So ideally, we're going to, you know, always be using max in these 3 cases right here. And similarly with the adjustment, it's going to be very close to max. Depending on how large the wind gets, you might have to go, you know, max 10. max plus 10, max plus 20 if it gets very large. So, the way that you need to do it, it's typically going to be right around max, even though you're going to be right at the min club line. So if I was to draw this line right here, it kind of is right up in this region right here for the club swap. Actually, that doesn't quite seem right. I think it's usually maybe just a little bit more up here, just a tiny bit, typically. So you usually have to kind of estimate down and try to land it right on this front of the fairway. You have to land it very aggressively if you actually want to pull this shot off. And as I mentioned, the range of how much you're going to need to adjust is just going to be dependent upon do they give you a 7, do they give you a 15. And it's going to dictate whether I need to go max 10. You just kind of got to scale it. A 7 wind, I'll go max. A 10 wind, maybe max plus 5. A 12 wind, max plus 10. 15 is going to be, kind of the extreme case. And that's where you're really going to need to start to crank it up even a little bit more. Max plus 20, for instance. So more or less there, that seems to kind of cover everything. Very similarly with this, maybe max minus 10, give or take. Max to max minus 10. Just depends on how large that wind gets. So that's what makes this hole specifically so challenging. There's a couple things. Moving to the lower elevation, but scaling that wind, not knowing whether it's going to be a 7 or 15 wind, is going to change the way that you need to play this significantly. So you just have to learn and adapt to the changes and hopefully go second. You really want to go second on this shootout, let me tell you. So that's more or less what you're looking at here. And, good luck with this hole, guys. And see you guys on the next guide.